into the Russian monarchy, and then she becomes, from Protestant faith, she becomes converted into the Eastern Orthodox Church too. So that's very much so a continuity. So we're looking at Russia, but again, I just kind of want to bring back the fact that they start out kind of really small in the Eurasian area, North Asia, Eastern Europe, within that area, okay? So we keep going from here. All right, so again, we did talk about Mongol rule in Russia and the things that were happening with Russians being affected by the Mongols. Some cities were a little different in their impact by the Mongols than others, right? Local administration were more so in the hands of the Russians, especially when we get to 1450. So ever since we got into chapter 15, technically, we started this new era. And College Board likes to choose the year 1450 for some odd reason. And so from that point on, Russia is starting to gain back their rule and gain back their territory from the Mongols. Were the Mongols really strong around 1450 still? They were starting to wane. Their power was starting to wane. And so especially after the death of Kublai Khan, the Mongols kind of started to pull back, and eventually they were able to gain their rule back. Remember their taxation system, the tributary system that the Mongols had. Eventually, they were able to get all that land back and kind of oust the Mongols back to where they were. Literacy did decline across Russia, and then some areas were very reducing in the cultural and economic life, but some cities actually prospered really well because of the Mongols. Do you remember a city that prospered? Moscow, absolutely. So Moscow is still going to be another continuity as a city of commerce, a city of trade, and just the cultural flourishing for Russia. So that's a good thing. And they remain pretty much agricultural. Okay. We'll start with a really influential leader for Russia, Ivan III, a.k.a. Ivan the Great. We're going to talk about several great leaders here. And then maybe you can more so know what role you want to take on for our dinner party later this week. So, Ivan III, Prince of Moscow, he kind of takes up some leadership roles to the next level. This is where you could credit him as creating this title of, you know, he's got a really strong central government, and he's ruler, he was prince, and then he becomes a czar for Russia. So this is the time of the czars. Spelled both with a C or a T, either way is fine. So if you get an FRQ and you're talking about the czars of Russia, you can use a C or a T, either way. All right? So he rises up against the Mongols, especially as their power is waning out. And then he's, again, the head of the church as well as political leader. Do we happen to remember what it's called when you're both like Caesar and Pope at the same time? Yeah, Caesaropapism. So still in Russia, religion is really big. That Eastern Orthodox Church is very big. But it's also the political rule at the same time. It's like a dual role. Okay, then we come to the family of the Romanovs. And so I believe Boyars is also one of the terms on our spice tea chart. Yeah, good. So the Boyars are the aristocrats who have a lot of pull. Even though they're not religious leaders, they're like the landed elite, and they own a lot of territory and really help expand and strengthen Russia. They choose Michael as the first czar under the Romanov dynasty. And from all of these leaders that we're mentioning today, starting with Ivan III, Ivan the Great, the expansion of Russia just keeps growing and growing and growing. Not so much westward, because remember at this time, Western Europe is still, they're going through their Renaissance, their Enlightenment, the Reformation, and all those good things that are happening in Western Europe. But they do expand south, and we're going to see in a later chapter that they have some wars with the Turks, too, territorial wars. But they especially expand eastward, all the way into like the present-day coast of California, literally, right? So America is still just those 13 colonies, right? And so at this time, the Romanov dynasty especially, they want to expand, and Catherine the Great, when we come to her, also expand all the way into present-day Alaska. So they really expand eastward more so. There aren't a ton of people who are strong enough to fend them off. So under Alexis, the role is expanded for the czars. There's a cleansing of the church. Okay. And they want to kind of get rid of the old believers who think that maybe the Pope or the leader of the church should have more power over political rulers, and then just kind of establish, themselves as an aristocracy even more so. And then Siberia starts to become a place of prison, pretty much, for those people who are against or oppose the rulers, and those criminals too. They're sent to Siberia. Really tough living in that region. Then we come to another great. Anybody want to take a guess? Peter the Great. Yeah. So you probably don't want to be Peter. Takes the beards off to make them not look so old and traditional and backwards looking. He's trying to update everything, right? Okay. Okay, so Peter the Great.
Oh my God.
We're still under the Romanov dynasty. Peter the Great does even more expansion under his rule. But here's a huge distinction for Peter the Great. He knows what is going on in Western Europe. He's heard about the Renaissance. He's heard about Enlightenment. He's heard about all these things that are changing Western expansion for the better, right? In Western Europe, they're exploring. They're pioneering all sorts of new colonization all over the world. And so Peter the Great really likes it. He gets excited about trying to bring that Western technology, innovation, and military innovation too into Russia. He goes incognito into Western Europe to try to see what's going on, why they're being so successful and prosperous. And then he moves the capital to St. Petersburg to try to get a little closer to Europe as well, and tries to kind of mimic those things that they're doing in Western Europe. He's still got a really strong centralized government too, and this is also where the secret police is born under Peter the Great. So those things that we know about Russia today, and maybe we've heard as we've studied the Cold War maybe in the past, the secret police there during the Cold War and the KGB and all that, it was born under Peter the Great to try to go see what are people talking about. Are there anybody who wants to oppose my rule, so they can kind of purge them of the empire, really. So they also added a lot of focus to the army and the navy especially. So as they're opening up more and more ports of trade, the Navy is really strengthened under Peter the Great. And it's going pretty well for Peter the Great. The only thing that most historians will agree as a not so wonderful thing is the way that the poor are treated. They're still serfs. And in Western Europe, you're like, yeah, that was a thing of like the 10th century, 11th century, right? And so they're still serfs and serfdom and it's really holding the economy for Russia at this time. So that was the only thing that was not super wonderful for Peter the Great's reign. He even wanted to westernize the clothing for the boyars and the people of Russia at the time. And he goes in for the aristocracy. Then we come to looks can be deceiving, not just your typical grandma-looking person. Catherine the Great. All right, and yes, she's called the Great because she's expanding Russia even more so. The military is really strong by this point, the Navy and the Army. But again, that institution of serfdom is even more so expanded and strengthened at this time. So there's a lot of things that are modernized under Peter the Great. Not everything is going super, super well, but the expansion of the territory of Russia is definitely still happening under Catherine the Great. There's a strong centralized government. There's a lot of theories of how her husband died, and then she was able to take over as Tsarina, because originally she was a German princess, right? A Protestant German princess at that. So I'm sure you can understand how a lot of people in Russia were kind of questioning, her taking over after the sudden death of her husband, Peter III. But she does take over, and she just kind of strengthens everything that was done through Peter the Great. She's a great patron of the arts and architecture, but was really concerned about this idea